the erosion you mentioned is in situations where the government gets real creative about using one of the existing classifications to apply it to things that it was never intended to cover. And the growth area, as it were, is in something called security information. And here's an example. When people went to state government during the shutdown and said, we want the names of people who are working, who didn't have to go on layoff, they were told they could not have the names of people who were working because it's security information. Now, there's a whole section of the Data Practices Act that deals with data about employees, and under that section, the fact that you're working is public, okay? But somebody in the Dayton administration decided they would apply the security information classification and said to the public, you can have access to that. Now, their rationale was, you cannot.
You cannot, okay.
Their rationale was, if people found out who was working and they weren't, they might get upset and do something to them. Well, I would submit to you, the day you came back to work, you know who worked, okay?
And of course, there's laws if you do something to
Exactly,
that, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And if you were really that, I'll use the word crazy, all you had to do was sit outside the building and see who came and went in the building.
Sure.
I mean, you know,
Right.
the streets weren't shut down. So another example of that is the law enforcement is now, there's a section of the Data Practices Act that spells out very clearly what information about law enforcement activities is public. It was one of the great compromises in building the Data Practices Act. Law enforcement is now beginning to say some just ordinary things that used to be public. They're calling security information and therefore rendering them not public. So, for example, if somebody at the Mega Mall,
Like Patriot Act stuff?
well, no, this is our law. This isn't Patriot.
Okay.
If some store at the Mega Mall says, there's some suspicious people hanging around my store, I want the Bloomington Police Department to come and check it out. In the Data Practices Act, the fact that that call was made and the fact that the cops responded to that call would be public information. The Bloomington Police Department is now calling it security information and is treating it as not public information.
But this creep sort of stems from what's been done at the federal level, isn't it, with Patriot Act?
I think that's part of it. The federal government, at least if you watch representatives of the federal government come here and talk, including the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, they do not like our Data Practices Act. They don't like it at all because too much is public. The worst example that they would give you is, in Minnesota, if the government's keeping information about me, no matter how it's classified, even if it's confidential, I have a right under the Data Practices Act to at least find out that the government has got the data. Now, I can't see it, but I can find out it's there.
They don't even want you to know it's there.
And they don't even want you to know it's there.
No.
Exactly.
Can I just, one other quick, it was on, another example of security information is the issue of Planned Parenthood, which is being built here in St. Paul, which I think, some of the stuff I can see being security information, but to where you want to know who's building the building by permits, and they say that security information is bogus. But from my point of view, particularly when they say it's documented threats against these people, and then you ask and look at the files, there's no documentation. Again, so it's in the general thing of how, one of the things about what's happening is security information, that's one of the erosions. But also, I want to further on to your question is the issue of enforcement. What's happening is government is starting to have a little bit more moxie and saying, how can I say it politely? Boulder dash you, how's that? You know, or something
Right.
too. Putting blocks, roadblocks, and there's not an option, and so that in its own way is an erosion. So when we're talking about earlier about what iPad can do and all that, is take some leadership, the governor's office, working with the legislature or whatever, to take a look at a better way of enforcing rather than go to court.
We only have a moment or two left, but you know, we should mention too, Andy, that this is nonpartisan in nature. I mean, it's just about information, and both the left and the right and those in the middle want to know this stuff. And if these erosions continue, guess what? The government can collect information on you all they want. You'll never know about it. And
Well, and whoever's in power wants to keep the information, right? Isn't
Well,
that the way it
and,
is?
you know, the best example of that is when the Obama administration was elected, the Freedom of Information community just went berserk with joy that things were going to get better. And guess what? They're not better.
They've learned.
They might be, well, with the National Defense Authorization Act, they might have gotten worse. So,
Now, well, you know, and the Obama administration is putting more whistleblowers in jail than the Bush administration ever did. You know, and it's like, what is this? But the nonpartisan thing, I think, is a very important point. The people that Rich and I work with in the legislature are some of the most liberal and some of the most conservative people in the legislature because they get it, okay? And I'm not always sure why they get it, but they get it, okay?
now, Don,
They understand it's the people's,
They understand.
Government.
Yeah, they understand it's the people's government. That's really good. In that, they both understand that part of what you do in a democracy is you hold the government accountable. And one of the ways you do that is getting access to information.